The deep dive is back. And today, we are going to a place that, honestly, it makes the pyramids look modern.
Oh, absolutely. It makes Stonehenge look like a recent renovation project.
We're heading to the edge of the Fertile Crescent, deep in southeastern Turkey, to a place that has completely shattered the blueprint of human history we all thought we knew.
We are talking about Göbekli Tepe. And it's a site that, it really represents an archaeological impossibility.
An impossibility, that's the perfect word for it.
For decades, we had this very neat, tidy sequence for how human society developed. First, you get farming, then people settle down, and only then, much later, do you get monumental architecture.
Right, the temples and the big projects come last.
Exactly. Göbekli Tepe just takes that entire equation and flips it completely upside down.
And this isn't just about some old building, you have to understand. This is a radical revision of who we were, and more importantly, what we were capable of thousands and thousands of years ago. So today, we're plunging into the world of Göbekli Tepe, a name that means potbelly hill in Turkish. And we're going to treat this like an archaeological thriller, where the main clue is this 11,000-year-old crime scene.
And the time frame is really what you have to focus on. It just demands your attention. Göbekli Tepe was founded around 9500 BCE.
9,500 BCE.
Right, which puts it squarely in what archaeologists call the pre-pottery Neolithic A, the PP&A period.
So pre-pottery, the name says it all.
It does. It means the builders were operating in the deepest antiquity. A period of incredible technological scarcity.
And that scarcity, that's the core paradox, isn't it? That's the thing we have to grapple with today. You have these massive, highly organized, finely carved structures.
Mental structures.
And they were built by people who had not yet crossed what we would consider the most basic thresholds of settled civilization.
Think about what they were missing. Really think about it. They had no metal tools, none. No copper, no bronze, and certainly no iron. Everything had to be done with stone.
So, stone on stone?
Stone on stone. They hadn't invented ceramic pottery yet, so you can forget about easy storage or transport or even, durable cooking pots. They were probably using things like waterproof baskets or maybe heavy stone bowls.
And the big one?
The big one. They hadn't achieved stable agriculture. They hadn't domesticated animals. There was no guaranteed food source to feed a large, settled workforce day in and day out.
So we have the most rudimentary technology imaginable, but somehow the most sophisticated structural coordination we've ever found for that period.
It's a complete contradiction.
To put this into perspective for you, the shock of it. Our usual benchmark for this kind of thing is Stonehenge, right?
Right. The famous megalithic site.
Gobekli Tepe predates Stonehenge by approximately 6,000 years.
6 millennia. It's almost impossible to comprehend that gap.
If you think of the Egyptian pyramids as, the peak of Bronze Age construction, Göbekli Tepe is this monumental ancestor that existed before people even figured out how to bake clay into a durable pot.
It really forces you to question the very foundation of our historical models. Specifically, the traditional sequence that was laid out by archaeologists like V. Gordon Childe, his whole Neolithic revolution theory.
That's the one we all learned in school.
It is.
Yeah.
And it insisted that the stability of agriculture must come before this kind of complex society. Göbekli Tepe just look at that and says, no.
No, the desire, the need for the monument came first.
Exactly. The ritual came first.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission today in this deep dive is to figure out how this impossible architecture completely rewrites the timeline of human civilization. We have to tackle the big provocative question. How did a culture lacking such basic technology achieve this level of monumental coordination and symbolism?
And was this knowledge just spontaneously invented on the spot? Or, and this is the more tantalizing idea, was it inherited? Was it a remnant from a far older, unknown organizational framework that somehow survived the transition from the Ice Age to the world we know?
We're going to dig into the evidence, the theories, and let the stones of Göbekli Tepe tell their own strange, mysterious story.
The story of how it was even found is a lesson in maybe historical arrogance. It starts with one of the biggest dismissals in archaeological history.
It's incredible that it was just sitting there, completely missed.
It really is. The site was first noted in a big survey back in 1963. Researchers from the University of Chicago and Istanbul University were mapping the area.
Okay.
They came to this gently rounded hill. They saw these fragments of worked limestone just littering the surface, and they wrote it off.
Wrote it off as what?
They concluded they were just looking at the remnants of an abandoned medieval cemetery. Simple grave markers, nothing special.
Medieval. They were off by about, what, 10,000 years?
At least. They spent almost no time there, assumed it was all relatively recent, and just moved on. They completely missed the fact that they had stumbled upon the world's oldest temple.
And the report just got filed away somewhere.
Filed away. And Göbekli Tepe just sat there, silent, for another 30 years.
Until Klaus Schmidt.
Until the late German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt. He was the one who had the aha moment.
What led him there?
Well, he was working on his own survey of prehistoric sites in the region in 1994. And he'd read that brief, very dismissive mention in the old Chicago report. He decided to go back and just re-examine that stone-littered hilltop.
So he was intrigued by the dismissal.
He was. And the first thing that captured his attention, what really made him stop and think, was the shape of the hill itself.
The Potbelly Hill?
Exactly. Göbekli Tepe rises about 15 meters, that's 50 feet, above the surrounding plain. But unlike the other plateaus nearby, which are rugged and natural, Schmidt immediately recognized the artificial quality of the tell.
A tell being an artificial mound.
Right, a mound built up over millennia from human occupation, debris, construction. He realized it could only be man-made.
And once you realize the hill itself is artificial,
then everything clicks into place. Suddenly, those broken pieces of limestone, the ones the first team thought were simple gravestones, they weren't recent at all. He realized they were the fractured tops of massive prehistoric megaliths that had been buried for thousands of years.
No.
He said he knew instantly he had found something revolutionary. He called it a gigantic Stone Age site, and he dedicated the rest of his life to excavating it.
So let's ground ourselves in what the site actually is. Physically, where is it?
It's located about 6 miles from the modern city of Urfa. It sits on a hilltop overlooking the vast fertile Harran Plain.
And that location is important, right? It's right in the foothills of the northern Fertile Crescent.
Critically important. This is the exact region where the earliest forms of domesticated wheat would later emerge. It's a cradle of the agricultural revolution.
And the mound itself, how big is it?
It's substantial. It covers about 8 hectares, which is around 20 acres. But here's the data point that should really make you pause.
Okay.
As of the most recent excavations, we've only uncovered about 10% of the site.
10%?
10%. We are looking at a tiny fragment of the total picture.
So the famous circles we see in pictures, that's just a small part of it.
A very small part. They've done ground-penetrating radar and geomagnetic surveys over the whole area, and those scans confirm the sheer extent of the complex.
What do they show?
They indicate there are at least 16 other megalith rings still buried under the surface.
16 more.
Spread across 22 acres. You do the math. I mean, each of these structures has multiple pillars. The current estimate is that the entire hidden complex could have nearly 200 of these towering megalithic stones, all organized in these enclosures, just waiting beneath the soil.
That's unbelievable. So what have they actually dug up so far in that 10%?
They focused on the main excavation area where they found those famous large circular enclosures. They're labeled A, B, C, and D.
And these are the oldest parts?
They constitute Layer 3, which is the oldest and most architecturally sophisticated phase of the site. We're dating that back to 9500 BCE.
And what do they look like?
These structures are breathtaking in their design. They're not just random circles. They range from 10 to 30 meters in diameter. That's about 33 to almost 100 feet across.
And they're made of limestone.
Local limestone. They have these very thick interior walls made of unworked, sort of irregular stones, which creates this really sturdy, defined, sacred space.
But the main feature, the thing everyone talks about, are the pillars.
Oh, the pillars are the stars of the show. Those remarkable T-shaped pillars. The megaliths.
Huge, right?
They're enormous. The tallest ones they've excavated tower 16 feet high, and they're estimated to weigh between 7 and 10 tons.
7 to 10 tons.
Each. And they represent the oldest known megaliths in the world, period. They predate any other monumental stonework by millennia.
And their placement isn't random?
Not at all. It's highly deliberate. Each enclosure follows this very similar, complex blueprint. You have 2 central, even taller pillars that stand in the middle, facing each other.
And the others surround them.
Right. They're surrounded by slightly smaller T-shaped stones, all of them oriented to face inward towards that central pair. It's like they're all gathered, watching a ritual in the center.
That intentional layout, it suggests something more than just building. It suggests planning, abstract thought.
It absolutely does. And there's analysis of Layer 3 that suggests something even more profound.
What's that?
That the 3 largest enclosures, B, C, and D, they might not have been laid out randomly over time. Some researchers believe they were planned from the start as a single, hierarchical, equilateral triangle complex.
A single geometric design connecting three massive structures.
If that's proven, it means the builders understood sophisticated geometry. They had the capacity for abstraction and large-scale architectural planning that spanned decades, maybe even centuries.
All before the first farmer ever broke ground.
It's the very definition of organized intellect surviving the Stone Age. It's not supposed to be there.
Okay, so this is where the archaeological thriller part really kicks in. We've seen the evidence. Monumental, geometrically planned architecture. Now we have to confront the contradiction.
The stunning contradiction.
These structures were built by people who, by all accounts, should have been technologically primitive. This is the core issue that just demands our suspicion of the mainstream narrative.
And we have overwhelming evidence for this. The people in this region at 9500 BCE were hunter-gatherers. They were living at what we call the dawn of village life.
But it was a good place to be a hunter-gatherer, right?
Oh, it was an environmental paradise. The northern edge of the Fertile Crescent was teeming with wild resources. Klaus Schmidt always emphasized that. It wasn't a hard life, necessarily.
Yeah, we have proof of what they were eating.
We have very concrete evidence thanks to an archaeozoologist named Joris Peters. He meticulously examined over 100,000 bone fragments recovered from the site.
100,000. What did they tell him?
A very clear story. Hunting. The builders were sustained primarily by wild game.
What kind of game?
Over 60% of all the bones were identified as gazelle, a huge percentage.
Okay.
But they also hunted boar, wild sheep, red deer, ducks, geese, a huge variety. But the key finding, the consistent thing, was that all of these animal remains were definitively wild.
No domesticated animals at all.
None. And the bones had clear-cut marks and splintered edges from being butchered and cooked right there on site, almost certainly for these massive, episodic feasts.
The reliance on gazelle, that tells us something about their lifestyle, doesn't it?
It's a crucial clue. Gazelle migrate seasonally. So it's almost certain that the rituals, the feasts, and the construction projects themselves were timed to coincide with these migrations.
So people weren't living there year-round.
It hints at a non-permanent residency, exactly. It was a seasonal gathering place, a ritual hub. People came together from all over, they performed labor, they performed rituals, and then they dispersed again. It wasn't a dense, permanently inhabited city like we'd see later.
But we have to be careful with the term hunter-gatherer here. It wasn't just meat.
No, the term needs nuance at Göbekli Tepe. While hunting was critical, they also found huge quantities of tools like grinding stones, mortars, and pestles.
Which means they were processing plants.
A lot of plants. It suggests considerable processing of wild cereals, einkorn, wheat, barley, which were incredibly abundant in that fertile environment.
So they had all the raw ingredients for agriculture right at their fingertips.
They did. They just hadn't yet formalized the process. They hadn't taken that final step into domestication.
So this brings us back to the central mechanical puzzle, the how. Monumental labor without civilization's tools. How do you quarry, transport, and erect 7 to 10-ton pillars up a steep hill without metal tools or the wheel?
The choice of material was the first key. They used the local limestone bedrock, which is relatively soft.
Okay, but what were they cutting it with?
Flint. Just flint tools.
Yeah.
Simple chipped stones like burns and awls were used to painstakingly chip away at the bedrock, shaping the pillars right there in the quarry before they even tried to move them.
That alone, I mean, the dedication that would take. Flint tools get dull constantly. Carving 10 tons of stone with another, slightly harder stone is a Herculean task.
That's almost unimaginable.
Yeah.
And once they were carved, then came the real challenge, moving them. You're fighting friction, the incline, the sheer crushing weight. The physics of it just demand massive organizational capacity.
And this is where the theories start to diverge, right? The labor estimate.
This is the heart of the mystery of their social structure. Klaus Schmidt, the original excavator, he argued that this kind of construction would have required hundreds of workers.
Hundreds, all gathered in one place.
Yes. To carve, to transport, to stand these pillars upright. And he hypothesized that to manage a workforce that large, you would need a powerful, highly coordinated authority. Perhaps a small, early religious elite who organized the masses.
So a priesthood?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
A hierarchy that emerged spontaneously, far earlier than we ever thought possible, driven solely by this ritualistic need.
If that model is right, it implies a truly radical shift in social organization. You're talking about the creation of a ruling class, a priesthood, before you have the agricultural surplus to even support a non-laboring elite.
It turns everything on its head.
But there are other views, aren't there? that push back against the hundreds of workers idea.
There are. And we have to consider them. Some researchers, drawing on experimental archaeology from other megalith sites, they suggest that the work could have been done by far fewer people.
How few are we talking?
As few as 7 to 14 individuals.
7 to move a 10-ton stone. Ow.
If they did it efficiently. If they were masters of leverage and mechanics, using ropes, wooden levers, rollers, sledges, and crucially, lubricants, using things like water or animal fat to reduce the friction. The sheer weight might have been manageable by a small, highly skilled, dedicated team.
So maybe not a massive gathering, but a small group of specialized masons.
It's possible. A team of, say, 12 to 24 skilled laborers could have potentially completed one of the smaller circles in just a few months.
That's a staggering difference in scale. From hundreds of people conscripted by religion to, what, a single extended family or a village community working together meticulously.
But it raises an important question, doesn't it? Regardless of the number.
Which is?
If it was a small group, you have to remember this effort was sustained for at least 1,500 years, across countless generations. That requires an incredible institutional memory, a planned continuity, a religious doctrine so strong that the project continued long after the original builders were gone.
And if it was a large group?
Then it required immediate, complex logistical engineering. How do you feed them, house them, and coordinate them all at once? Either way, the complexity itself is the evidence.
Right. Whether it was a few people over a long time or many people over a short time, it still points to this incredibly robust, highly coordinated organizational framework. It just demands that we look backward, not forward.
Precisely. Was this sophisticated social structure really invented on the spot by people who were still hunting gazelles? Or is the complexity itself the smoking gun? Is it evidence of a monumental knowledge base that survived from a previously unknown, much older world? We simply cannot assume they started from scratch.
Right.
If the sheer physical effort of moving these stones is shocking, the messages they carved into them are even more cryptic. They transport us into a worldview that is just utterly foreign to us.
Let's talk about the symbolism, starting with the T-shaped pillars themselves. They're not just support beams.
No, not at all. Schmidt was adamant about this. He believed they are anthropomorphic beings. They are stylized humans, or perhaps more likely, powerful gods or ancestors.
And we have proof of that, right? It's not just a guess.
It's not a guess. We know this because of the intricate, subtle carvings found on some of the megaliths. They have these low-relief depictions of arms bent at the elbow, running down the narrow sides of the pillar. The hands meet across the belly on the front, and they're often holding a belt or wearing a loincloth, which confirms this human or humanoid representation. And it generally suggests male attributes.
But the most unnerving part is the head, or the lack of a head.
That's right. The horizontal slab on top is interpreted as the shoulders. It suggests these figures were deliberately left headless.
Why?
It's an intentional, artistic, and symbolic choice. Maybe it denotes their power or transcendence, or maybe it's just meant to represent the boundary between the material world and the divine spiritual world. We don't know.
And then there are the animals. The mystery deepens when you look at the menagerie of animals carved all over the stone surfaces.
And these are decidedly not happy utilitarian symbols celebrating a good hunt.
No, they're not. They are predominantly fierce, dangerous, menacing creatures.
We see lions, boars, foxes, scorpions, snakes, spiders, vultures. It's an aggressive, powerful display.
There's one pillar in enclosure C, I think. It's terrifying.
Yes, it features this snarling predator, maybe a leopard or a lion, locked in this dynamic, violent struggle with a wild boar. It's not a peaceful scene.
And what's so crucial here is that the carvings largely ignore the animals they were actually eating.
Exactly. Where are all the gazelles? Gazelles made up 60% of their diet, but they are barely represented. Why ignore your main food source and instead focus so heavily on predators and venomous creatures? Why carve a huge, terrifying scorpion that has no immediate practical use for your survival?
So what are the theories? What could it mean?
Well, one view is that it relates to shamanic practices, that the builders were trying to master the hunter's fears or maybe harnessing these animal spirits as powerful allies in some kind of trance or religious experience.
So they're either fighting them or becoming them.
Something like that. Other theories see them as powerful totems, guardians meant to stave off evil spirits, or maybe just to communicate the fierce power of the deities that were housed inside these enclosures.
Beyond the animals, though, there's even stronger evidence that Göbekli Tepe was a center for, well, a cult of death.
Yes, there's a profound obsession with death and the afterlife here.
The famous Vulture Stone is the best example of this. Pillar 43 in Enclosure D.
It's an incredibly complex scene carved into the stone. It includes several vultures and, most notably, a headless human figure.
A headless human, just like the pillars themselves.
Exactly. The vulture carvings strongly suggest a death cult, or at least a belief system where these carrion birds were responsible for transporting the soul of the deceased, or maybe even the flesh, to the heavens, a kind of celestial burial.
And this wasn't an isolated belief, was it?
No, we know it wasn't. We see similar symbols and practices at other Neolithic sites nearby, some in Syria, which suggests there was this broad, shared ritual framework about death and vultures across the entire northern Fertile Crescent at this time.
And there's physical evidence, too. Even more chilling.
The most chilling evidence relates directly to how they treated human remains. Researchers found fragmented human crania inside the rubble and fill of the site.
And these weren't just broken skulls.
No. They had clear, intentional incisions and modifications carved into them.
This is evidence of a Neolithic skull cult.
It's interpreted as direct confirmation of one, yes. This was a known, though very disturbing practice, where human skulls were specially prepared, defleshed, maybe plastered or decorated, and kept as objects of reverence or ritual power.
And we've seen this elsewhere.
Yes, at later, nearby sites like Jericho and Tel Aswad. This just confirms the incredible antiquity of this very complex, very specific ritual practice.
So Schmidt, the original excavator, he put all this together. The vultures, the skulls, the hilltop location.
And he speculated that the site's location was chosen precisely for this reason. There was a major ceremonial burial ground, the center of a death cult, where the spirits of the dead could look out from this high hilltop and view the hunter's dream landscape below.
What all of this complex, often menacing symbolism really shows us is, well, a profound gulf of comprehension. We are trying to understand the worldview of people who existed in a total information vacuum from our perspective.
The temporal gap is just staggering. I read one archaeologist who put it this way: there is more time separating Göbekli Tepe from the first written Sumerian clay tablets.
Which were around 3300 BC.
Right. More time between them than there is separating Sumer from us today.
Wow, let that sink in.
And that immense distance means there are zero contemporary sources. No written explanations, no oral histories that could have possibly survived. We have nothing to tell us what these symbols truly meant. We are staring at the incomprehensible belief system of a lost monumental world.
The very existence of Göbekli Tepe doesn't just, push our timeline back a bit. It completely inverts our understanding of what drives human civilization in the first place.
Yeah.
This is the point where the history textbooks literally have to be rewritten.
Completely. For decades, the foundational belief system, the Neolithic Revolution model, it was practically immutable. It dictated that farming had to come first.
Right. Farming gives you the food surplus.
Exactly. Agriculture provides the economic engine. You get stability, you get resources, you get surplus food, and that surplus allows people to finally settle down in one place.
And only after all of that do you get the complex society and the free time needed for massive construction projects like temples.
So the old view was this very strict linear progression. Agriculture leads to settled communities, which then eventually leads to temples and complex organization.
But the evidence from Göbekli Tepe proves the exact opposite sequence.
It's startling proof of the reverse. We see monumental ritual and temple construction, this massive coordinated project happening first.
And that huge effort creates a problem that needs to be solved.
It creates a profound, sustained need for organized labor and for centralized resource management. And that need, in turn, is what drove the shift towards settled communities and eventually formalized agriculture.
So the desire for the temple, the sociocultural change, was the primary driver, not the technology of farming.
That's the argument. And it's powerfully supported by archaeologists like Ian Hodder from Stanford. He argued, and I'm quoting here, "This shows sociocultural changes come first, agriculture comes later." This whole region is now seen as the real origin of complex Neolithic societies.
The site literally created its own necessity.
It did. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were already surrounded by the raw materials they needed. There were wild sheep, wild grains like einkorn and barley, all growing in abundance.
And we know they were harvesting and processing those wild grains.
They were. But relying on wild hunting and gathering to feed these huge periodic ritual feasts, which, if Schmidt's labor estimates are right, would have involved hundreds of people.
That's incredibly unstable from a resource perspective.
Extremely. You can't base your massive, multi-generational construction project on the luck of the herd migration or a good harvest of wild grain. It's too unpredictable.
So the constant organizational challenge of feeding everyone who came for the rituals in the building.
That may have been the defining catalyst for controlled cultivation. The desire for a reliable, predictable supply of carbohydrates to fuel the labor force might have forced them to stop just gathering wild grains and start actively managing them.
Which is the critical first step toward domestication.
It's the birth of farming.
And the chronology, the dates, they support this perfectly.
They do. The monumental ritual construction at Göbekli Tepe peaks around 9500 BCE, and then domesticated wheat, the specific genetic strain that becomes the foundation of modern agriculture, it appears just 5 centuries later.
And how far away?
Just 20 miles from Göbekli Tepe.
So the communal monumental work came first, and it demanded the innovation of farming to sustain itself. The temple literally built the town, not the other way around.
That's the revolutionary idea that Gobekli Tepe puts on the table.
Now that we understand its monumental beginnings, we have to look at what happened to Gobekli Tepe, its eventual fate. This site wasn't built overnight. It evolved over, what, at least 1,500 years?
At least. It spans 8 distinct phases, from around 9500 to roughly 8000 BCE.
And in those early phases, layer 3, that's when we see the big circular megalithic enclosures like A, B, C, and D being built.
Right. But it's important to note they weren't built in total isolation. Even back then, evidence shows that round oval domestic structures were being built nearby.
So they weren't purely nomadic, even at the very beginning.
It suggests life was already semi-sedentary. The people building the temples were also living there, at least for part of the year.
And as the site evolved over those centuries, we see changes.
We do. The domestic buildings transition from those early round oval designs to more rectangular floor plans, which is a shift we often associate with the later PP&B period.
And crucially, the new structures built on top of the old ones get smaller.
They get significantly smaller and much less complex. The monumental ambition seems to fade over time.
This decline in monumentality feeds into one of the biggest mysteries of the site, something that puzzled people for years. Why were these gigantic, magnificent circles eventually filled in and completely covered up?
For a long time, the prevailing interpretation, which was driven largely by Klaus Schmidt's original hypothesis, was that the structures were intentionally backfilled.
Buried on purpose.
Yes, that it was a form of ritualistic burial, that they were decommissioning the entire temple complex once its religious power had waned.
It's a very romantic narrative, isn't it? The ritual burial of the world's oldest temple.
It's a great story. But it's a story that has shifted significantly based on more recent geoarchaeological research. The current revised view gives us a more grounded, though I think equally fascinating explanation.
And what's that?
The geological evidence now suggests that these lower-lying structures suffered repeated, severe damage from natural slope slides, basically landslides.
Caused by what?
Probably environmental factors. Maybe seismic activity, which is common in the area, or just periods of heavy rainfall destabilizing the artificial hill. And these slides repeatedly inundated the enclosures with sediment and rubble.
And the type of rubble is the key piece of evidence here.
It's key. It wasn't clean, sterile fill that was brought in specifically for a ritual burial. The fill actually included midden deposits.
Domestic waste. Garbage.
Exactly. And even human burials. It suggests that all the stuff from the adjacent living areas was just being washed down the hill and into the ceremonial enclosures by these slides.
So the builders were essentially fighting a losing battle against their own environment.
It seems so. We know they made repeated attempts at stabilizing the hill. They built things like terrace walls to try and hold the slope back. But in the end, those efforts just weren't enough against the scale of the erosion.
So eventually they just gave up on the big enclosures.
It appears so. The damaged enclosures, like the magnificent enclosure D, were abandoned. And the space started to be used differently. As the monumental building activity declined in those later phases, smaller, much less complex habitating structures were built directly among the ruins of the old megaliths.
They built a village on top of the ruins of their own cathedral.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, the entire site was abandoned around 8000 BCE. It had either served its purpose or it had simply become too environmentally unstable and structurally unviable to maintain its original grand function.
You know, this shifting interpretation from this grand ritual burial to just a slow collapse caused by the environment and abandonment, it actually complicates the story in a really profound way.
It does, because it confirms that the complex was never purely ritualistic.
Right. It supports the idea that the ritual and the profane, the sacred and the everyday, they all coexisted right there. They weren't just gathering for grand ceremonies and feasts.
They were also dealing with the mundane logistics of daily life and settlement. We have evidence of those domestic structures, and even more amazingly, carved rainwater harvesting systems.
Cisterns.
Cisterns carved directly into the bedrock that could hold at least 150 cubic meters of water.
So at the same time they're building the world's first known megalithic temple, they're also developing sophisticated methods for water management and resource logistics.
The entire site was this dynamic, functioning, but highly vulnerable ecosystem. And it seems it eventually collapsed under the weight of its own environment and the sheer difficulty of maintaining these monumental structures in an age of such limited technology.
So this deep dive into Göbekli Tepe, it forces us to confront and rethink pretty much everything we thought we knew about the origins of civilization. The traditional timeline is just unequivocally broken.
It's broken. We have to now accept that complex social organization, monumental architecture, and this profound symbolic and religious thought. It all emerged before the settled agricultural life that we thought made it all possible.
It's a really humbling realization for modern archaeology, isn't it?
It is. What we believed were the absolute prerequisites for civilization, stable farming, metalworking were, in the case of Göbekli Tepe, actually secondary. They were reactive developments.
The idea came first.
The ritual and the idea came first. The necessity of organized survival and agriculture followed. And it was driven by the social requirements of just sustaining this monumental center.
And yet, despite all the decades of excavation, all the revised chronologies, the enduring mystery is still the sheer impossibility of the achievement, given the staggering lack of technology they had at the time.
We still don't fully comprehend their worldview. It's evidenced by those utterly foreign symbols, the menacing creatures, the headless humanoid pillars, the documented skull cult. It's a different mental universe.
We can connect a few dots, maybe. Like the vulture cult linking to nearby sites in Syria.
But the deep cosmological and mythological meaning behind it all is almost certainly lost to us across that immense gulf of comprehension. They had a complex theology that looked at the world in the way we just can't fully access anymore.
It's just stunning to consider that these 10-ton stones were quarried, moved, and erected using only flint tools, raw manpower, and this incredibly sophisticated planning.
That abstract intellect, the evidence for that potential geometric layout of enclosures B, C, and D into a single hierarchical triangle. That suggests a level of engineering and mathematical thinking that's just so far beyond what their tools would imply.
The tools were primitive, but the engineering and the social structure were anything but.
Which brings us back to our fundamental suspicion and to our final provocative thought for you to consider.
If this monumental complexity, this sophisticated geometry, this profound theology, if it was all achieved without metal, without pottery, without reliable farming, using only raw social organization and pure intellect, does Göbekli Tepe really represent the start of advanced human civilization? Was it really a sudden, spontaneous leap driven by ritual?
Or, given the shocking sophistication of its organization and its iconography, that implied knowledge of planning and labor management. Is it perhaps evidence of something else entirely? Could it be evidence of a monumental knowledge base that survived a cataclysm?
Could Göbekli Tepe have been built by the last organized generation of a far older, unknown, advanced civilization?
Yeah.
A memory of monumental construction deliberately built in stone just before the necessity of the agricultural revolution forever changed what it meant to be human.
We may never know if Göbekli Tepe was the launch pad for a new civilization or if it was merely a sophisticated, awe-inspiring echo of a monumental history that we have yet to uncover. And we'll leave that profound question for you to mull over.
You have been listening to an unmuted transmission. To explore more files from the unknown, hit the subscribe button. End of log.